Welcome to Untitled Spain, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us and for all your comments and likes and shares on all the content that we're trying to put out. My name's Ryan Fasan, coming to you as always on behalf of Untitled Spain. And today we've got another one of our seminar series. So without further ado, today's session is all about a design professional centric look at what's happening in the tile industry, what some of the trends are, which is something that there's a lot more info on in a lot of these videos, but mostly how to optimize your usage of ceramics in modern specs to leverage everything the industry is bringing to your disposal to optimize your budgets and make sure that you can get as much ceramic as possible into your projects today, because ceramic tile really has everything clients are looking for. So I called this one client-centric achievement to progressive specifications. So what we're going to look at is a huge broad scope of everything that's going on in the tile industry, from trends to emerging product categories to how to best think about them, where to approach them in your design process, when to look at tile. That's one of the key points. And then we're going to go through some trends and some interesting information. But the very first thing that is, whether you're a design professional or a salesperson or whoever you are, I'm hoping that you're going to get something out of this, because at the end of the day, what we're looking at first is what's going on inside our clients' heads. What is the way that we're going to be able to reach them and make sure that we're able to describe our vision and make them understand what some of their options are and what the strengths and benefits are of those options. And when it comes to tile, unless you're deeply involved in the industry, it's difficult, because we are one of the fastest, rapidly innovating industries in the world outside of tech, and it's difficult for clients to know what their potential is with this product. And I use this quote from Steve Jobs all the time, because it really highlights what goes on in the ceramic industry, that clients really don't know what they want until we show it to them. And it's up to us to be the experts, and I hope I'm going to give you some tips and tricks today that'll allow you to do that for your clients and help them understand better how ceramics really can apply. So first, we're going to go through some of the inherent benefits of ceramics that really speak to the consumer mindset today. But one of the first things we have to address is what's bouncing around inside our client's head. What is that consumer mindset, and what is going to allow us to connect with them, to understand and make them buy into what we're trying to do for their project. So if you think about what makes you kick into a purchasing decision, there's certain things that really are ubiquitous, and it doesn't matter what realm we're talking about, whether it's a finish for our building or something else, a shirt or a new hat or something like that. We're always looking for a good return on investment, and things that speak to safety, reliability, healthiness, of course, and hygiene is something that's very top of mind right now, and probably will be for the foreseeable future coming out of this. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with trends. Obviously, performance-based initiatives or products are very important as well. So as I said, hygiene in healthcare, in our homes, and in any public space like an office as well. Public health and hygiene is something that truly is top of mind for people today. So talking along those lines in terms of the products that you're selecting and the ease of ownership and how a client's going to live with the space that you're creating for them makes a big deal. Now, in the world of tile, because it's such a long-lasting material, I don't like to talk about upfront cost. It really is a false economy, and of course there's a lot of less expensive products as far as installed costs that are out there. But when you start getting your client to think about how long they're going to have that investment and amortizing that cost, not only fiscally but also in time and maintenance and things like that, the ease of ownership and the amortized cost value builds into that return on investment story as well. So all of these things allow us to specify the minimum effective dose. The better we educate our clients and ourselves on what's possible in ceramics, it lets us not over specify and spend a larger amount of our budget on areas where we don't have to. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to do that. But first, I want to talk about some of the inherent benefits. Now, you may know all of these, but they're things that we keep repeating. They're in the ytile.com. They're in that video I was talking about on Tile of Spain, because it's something that ceramics are completely unique in how they perform and what they can do for us in our projects. It's one of the only things we can render in color that doesn't fade with the sun. So think about, of course, for exteriors, but think about being able to reconfigure spaces for interiors. It's huge for office spaces so that you can move cubicles and partition walls and things like that, and the flooring doesn't change because it's been exposed to the sun. You can do that 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. It offers so much flexibility for our spaces. Obviously for outdoor as well, it makes a big deal. If you're looking for products with a good flame spread rating, our tiles fired somewhere between 19 and 2200 degrees. So, and it's completely inert and non-combustible. Not only that, it doesn't provide a sink for smoke fumes and things like that. Oftentimes, a lot of the material that gets replaced in a fire refurbishment is material that wasn't even burned. It's just absorbed all of that smoke odor, and you can't keep it in the space. Tile not only survives the fire itself, it preserves the substrates behind it, and it won't absorb the smoke. So if it's in an adjoining space, it actually oftentimes can survive a refurbishment or restoration project from a fire. Now, with our weather going crazy and weather patterns changing around the world, floods are becoming a growing concern in a lot of different areas across the US. It's another material, or tile is again a material that survives floods because it's inorganic and inert. It inhibits the growth of mold and bacteria, another huge thing for people today. Again, protects the substrates behind it. So for any kind of wet areas, and think about the way that we're designing our master bedrooms today, where the ensuite is spilling out into the master bedroom, and we've got we want a continuous surface all the way through that space. So thinking about a hard surface like ceramic for those kind of spaces makes a huge difference. This was actually a picture from my house and refinishing the oak flooring in my family home when I was younger. And you know, tile being the quintessential chameleon with all the power of digital technology that we have at our disposal today, it means that we can do weathered metals or woods or marbles or just about anything without any of the performance concerns or maintenance concerns or cost associated with the upkeep of those materials. Now, this is a huge thing for us in the design professional world, is the value-added coatings that we're adding to our glazes and the bodies of our tile. There's all sorts of amazing technology that we can do today, from tile that's more slip resistant when it's wet, to tile that has catalytic oxides encapsulated within the glaze that make the surface actually resist paint and other contaminants, but also destroy organic material and bacteria and viruses upon contact with the surface. The neat thing about these catalysts is that unlike a normal chemical reaction, because they're encapsulated in a glaze and they only use different spectrums of light to operate, they're continuously available and they never sort of burn off. So it does great things for the cleanability of tile, but it also changes the hydrophilic property of water and make it sheet across the surface much easier and allow for self-cleaning tile. I know there's a lot of healthcare facilities that are only specifying products that have these kind of additives because of the hygiene characteristics and the cleanability characteristics that they have. Now, our industry is also champions of joint ventures. There's all sorts of creative initiatives where a ceramic company is partnering with another industry to come up with collaborations that add so many layers of value to the already huge inherent benefits of ceramics. This is one manufacturer that's partnering their slab production plant with a induction range manufacturer, and they're actually laminating an induction range in between gauge ceramic porcelain slabs, so that we've got this beautiful cooking space that, because of the thermal mass and low conductivity of ceramic and the way that induction works, as soon as we're done cooking and we take that pot off, we can put it not only anywhere on that surface without a trivet, we can also immediately set that table, and that cooking island can also function as a dining space, which is a huge thing when it comes to tiny homes and minimizing our space. And the things that are happening with urban density in a lot of our larger cities. There's all sorts of initiatives, from drop ceilings, using slim gauge porcelain instead of the traditional material that really is an eyesore and almost an afterthought. You can actually have a reflected ceiling plan that not only reflects the space and hides our ambient LED lighting, but also reflects the aesthetics of the flooring or the wall cladding as well. There's new think tank initiatives where we're looking at new ways to leverage our digital technology and the power of minerals being the source of our glazes to use to do printed photovoltaics and touch-sensitive glazes. Now, those last two aren't commercially viable yet, but they're something that we're working very, very steadily towards. So I want you to dream big, and I'm hoping to give you the tools to help your clients dream big and think outside backsplashes and shower surrounds. There's so many more applications for tile today. In this space, absolutely everything there, from the butcher block counter to the veneer fronts on the cabinetry, to the worktop and sink itself, as well as the built-ins behind. Everything in there is done in porcelain. So really, the limits of what tile can do for your projects today is really the limits of your imagination. So one of the big hurdles we always have to cross, and one of the big sort of stealers of market share in ceramics is low-cost installed product. And obviously cost is a big deal. So I want to give you some tips of how to talk around that cost equation. I already talked about amortization and thinking about the cost over the lifespan of the building. And when you do that, often for the average investment of a commercial or residential building and how long a client's going to be holding that investment, the amortization tells a story itself, and tile becomes the lowest cost option. What we can do as specifiers is just specify the minimum effective dose. And by that, I mean leveraging the thickness or gauge of the ceramics that we're using to only specify for the technical characteristics that we need and to minimize the thickness of our tile as much as possible. I don't know if you know this, but somewhere between 30 and 40% of the landed cost of our material is just in freight and duty. And so the more we can minimize that thickness, the more tile we load into our cans, the more we minimize the freight component of our landed cost, and it lets us get more tile into our project because we're stretching that budget. So 1 millimeter in thickness, if our average tile is 10 millimeters thick, by just decreasing it by 1 millimeter for any area in your space, you're reducing the freight component of that landed cost by about 10%. It makes a huge deal. By the end, it winds up being about a 5% cost savings per millimeter for the end user. So selecting that proper gauge is absolutely critical for us today, and in getting more tile into our specs and getting the kind of spaces that we want to get by utilizing the industry standards and leveraging the glazed porcelain or traditional ceramics in minimized thicknesses. It lets us get more ceramic into our jobs. Again, it also helps us with forethought. The earlier we start thinking about ceramics, and once I get to the specification section, we're going to get more in depth on that. But by choosing ceramics much earlier, I want you to walk away from today's session thinking about ceramics not as another cladding material, but as a systemic component of your building's operation. Because the earlier we do that, the more strategies we can build into our design that ceramics can bolster. And they really can help with the optimization of energy use in a space, the use case, the livability, and everything else. And the earlier we plan for it, the better we can optimize our substrate tolerances, things like grades, to allow for us to utilize the different gauges possible. So we see a lot of this with interiors spilling into exteriors today, and we're going to get into 2cm pavers in a little bit, but to transition to the outside here in a 2cm product from a 10 mil in a mortared product for the interior, it lets us stretch our budget because we're not mortaring that in place outside. The installation goes much quicker and less expensive because we don't have to prep the substrate, we don't have to pour a slab, we don't have to get our tolerances for these large formats so tight in our planarity of our slab. It just lets us do so much. So if you start thinking about tile in the structural design phase instead of the finishing, it makes a huge difference. And we'll get more into that when we get to specs. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what really is going to hook your clients in, and that's some of the trends. And we're going to fly through it. If you want to see a more in-depth thing on trends, I invite you to look up either on Coverings Connected or here on Tile of Spain, some of the trends talks that I've done this year. But we see a sort of shift that's happening. Last year, we were really kind of getting out of the minimalist mindset that we've been in for so long in terms of design language and moving to a more maximalist style. Now, maximalism was something that really didn't appeal to me when I first saw it, because this is kind of what I had in mind. And a lot of what I saw when I was reading, articles on maximalism and things like that was just a cacophony, a visual cacophony of these colors and patterns and everything sort of crammed into spaces. Now, there's ways to do maximalism in a very elegant and inviting way, but it's also true that that's not necessarily the right look for everybody. And I think we're moving to a little bit more broadly applicable, but still stimulating sort of design language that really embraces the kind of concepts of abstract expressionism. The neat thing about that movement, around the 1950s in New York City specifically, a lot of artists sort of came into the abstract expressionist field, and the one unifying principle was that there wasn't a unified style. There were all sorts of different abstract expressionists, like the action painters like Pollock, to color block painters. and all sorts of different things. But what it really did was tell a story and invite the viewers of the art to connect in some way and on some level with the artwork. And I think that that's what we're really doing in our spaces. So instead of sort of giant strong blocks of color, we're seeing a lot of the colors move into our stone look programs, where we're getting blues and pinks and greens and golds and really aggressive vein patterns that's sort of building this layered effect that's really necessary for our compositions today, but in a little bit more approachable and broad base. We're seeing a lot of this interesting marriage of seemingly diametrically opposed styles that are in tension, and the effect is incredible with that like raw, very rustic, natural wood countertop, and the very clean aesthetic with patterns and high contrast. It just gives us so much potential. The other thing that we're doing today in ceramics is, between punch technology and digital decoration of not just color, but also effects like finishes, from glossy to satin to matte, that we can do digitally. Adding volume, sucking away volume, doing all sorts of things to manipulate our surfaces of our stones so that we can create these deeply nuanced and layered looks, which layering is really one of the most important things. And you know, we see these wonderfully fantastic, almost like paint swirls, but from another angle or another perspective, it could also be stone. And these marriage hybrid materials marrying with our large format, super graphic florals and Art Nouveau motifs, as well as terrazzos and things like that. These little sort of nuances that are layered, that let someone come into a space, and from 20 feet away, it looks completely different from 6 feet away, from an oblique angle. That's the kind of nuance that's happening in our ceramic programs today. Again, we're seeing these more aggressive stones where white marble will never go away, but think about looking for something that has, you know, splashes of color like the golds and blues in this beautiful marble look floor. So we're going to fly through a few of the macro trends, and as I say, there's a lot of this information in my deeper dive trend talks. But we're seeing a lot of metal inlay with the rise of Art Deco and 1920s motifs, as well as mid-century modern 1950s. Now, this is something that's really important to abstract expressionism, is the canvas is an equally important protagonist as the paint or whatever medium is being used for the art as well. So we're seeing these deeply nuanced kind of neutral canvas programs come out that hold up to the strength of the colors and everything that's going on around them, both in tile and in furniture and in fixtures. I talked about the aggressiveness of the stones, and the interesting thing that we're seeing is a lot of older quarries that maybe have been dormant for 60, 70 years are starting to be reopened because, you know, they went dormant not because they were running out of stone, but because that stone went out of fashion. And we're seeing a lot of these historical quarries start opening up again because our overall aesthetic that we're looking for in stone is something that is deeply natural and engaging. I love this sort of allegorical design language, this language that we're doing in our product design today that is really telling a story, and like, you know, brain teaser images and things like that, it has a different connotation and resonance for everyone that's in the space. Some people might say this looks like a whole bunch of paint splashed all over the place. Other people see an oyster shell. There's all kinds of layers, and really that's what our design language is like today. It's inviting the viewer to tell their story and connect on multiple levels with the spaces and the products that we're creating. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of is a hyper matte finish with this really tight spectrum color range, where we're just increasing and decreasing saturations, but we're staying in a very tight spectrum. So we have this beautifully organic variation that's layered, again, building into those layers that we're doing in our design, but with a hyper matte finish that has a lot of contrast with some of the really high gloss metals and glass and things like that we're using today. We're seeing a lot of oxidization, and our industry is creating new minerals and frits to capture that perfect stage of weathering that we can get to with different steels and different metals. And that's one of the wonderful things about ceramic. Because of all of the inherent characteristics I was talking about, we can freeze frame that perfect state of rustication and keep it forever. We're seeing a lot of traditional ceramics, traditional baked earth, come back into the fore. Terracottas in various different shades, from the lightest here to the deep reddy browns. The aesthetic of baked dirt is a perfect set-off to the wonderful glazes that we're doing. And that's another huge revival, is the classic chemistry, which was my absolute favorite thing to do as a product development specialist, was get my hands dirty and mix the oxides and frits myself and start looking at what I could do with glaze. And this history that we have in ceramics is absolutely amazing. We've got centuries of artisans that have developed all these unique and beautiful glazes, and we're seeing more and more of them come back into vogue. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about scale. I talked about slabs and panels, and that's a huge thing that we have at our disposal today in large formats that you normally think of agglomerate stones, manufactured stones, traditional natural stones, and things like that. We can actually get to those scales in ceramic today with all of the inherent characteristics. There's new developing standards like the gauge porcelain standard for floors, walls, and countertops that came out, the ANSI standard, a couple of years ago. I know that the ICC, the International Construction Code, is actually changing their large format standards. They're in the process of setting those today, soon. I know that they were going to meet at coverings in April last month, but obviously they couldn't do that because of this pandemic. So what they're doing is they're increasing the size of slabs that are, or the size of tiles that are available or can be recommended for a bonded exterior facade. So if that's something that you do in your practice, start looking into that. We're seeing, as the formats get bigger, we're also seeing a return to a lot of smaller formats, both on floors and walls. And most importantly, we're seeing a big return of the square, which is really, really interesting, because for a long time here in North America, we got completely away from squares en masse, floors or walls. And today we're seeing a revival of those come back more and more. We're seeing a lot of sort of just slightly tweaked and off-norm sizes, but with normal ratios, a 2-to-1 or a 4-to-1 ratio, but in these kind of weird and a little bit different and interesting formats, like this one here, which is a 4.5 by a 5.5 inch bevel. So it's a very traditional subway look in a slightly off tradition format. The other thing that we're seeing more and more of in specifications is not going with a running bond. Again, leveraging and working with the inherent characteristics of the material and just celebrating the natural linear grid of tile. So think about if you're doing a lot of running bonds or intricate pattern work, think about what it does to just keep all of those grid lines linear and allow the personality of the material to come out and keep some rigidity in the grid work that you're doing. Now, invisible scale is another huge one. We're doing a lot of super graphics. With all of our capabilities in digital, we have so much more potential to bring decorative programs to the market that really can expand or contract to just about any space. Finally, I'm going to quickly go through some patterns before I get to specs. We're seeing a lot of abstract organics and artisanal products that normally had to be done by hand by skilled craftsmen. We're doing a lot of them in larger scale. This is a 1 meter by 1 meter tile that really looks like a hand-done wood inlay floor. We're seeing a mashup between both the 1920s and the 1950s aesthetics. So we're sort of getting a lot of that mid-century modern coming back in, and a lot of 1920s Art Deco and Art Nouveau coming back. And what's really interesting is the two of those are being mashed up and paired together in really neat ways. As I said, Art Nouveau and the florals and the organics that came with that kind of design language. Think of Alphonse Mucha and Gustav Klimt and those kind of styles are being utilized more and more in our decorative programs and often overlaid as a seamless integration with the field. In this case, it's kind of like a fabric tile pattern that's overlaid on top of a stone. We're seeing a lot of tonal shifts, so because we're adding a lot of really vibrant finishes, artwork, throw pillows, things like that in our spaces, with a lot of patterns in our tile programs, we're seeing a lot of tone on tone on tone and utilizing shadow and texture to give that tonal shift and build those layers into an otherwise very monochrome finish. We're softening our linear, so we love those linear lines that we see in this. This is actually inspired by a roofing tile, and it's a wall cladding by a really creative design studio. And this, again, all of these layers, there's our linear grid, there's the softly curved interior of the space, and that wonderful classic ceramic glaze. We're seeing color being interspersed into our terrazzos and other materials like our marbles and terracottas and these splashes of color like stracciatella gelato. Now we're also loving linear, but also loving all sorts of pattern and the sort of exuberance that comes from this wide range of expression. So these kind of regular but random inserts of the metal inlays. Again, as we're going through, in each of these pictures, you see multiple of these trends that I'm talking about, and these are the kind of layers that we're building into our tiled programs. I talked about some of the older quarries with those really aggressive stones, and we're seeing a lot of that come into our stone looks in tile today. So finally, we're just going to quickly go through some spec information that is critically important in getting your vision into your projects on budget and allowing your clients to utilize everything that's possible. So one of the things that I really want you to walk away from today with is that when you're using large formats, you can either spend your resources in forethought, or you can spend them in money. And what I mean by that is if you want to utilize a large format, whether it's gauged large porcelain slabs or simply a 1 meter by 1 meter or a 2 foot by 4 foot, those kind of formats, as we get into the larger formats, the earlier we think about them, the earlier we get our trades involved and we set our substrate tolerances, and we screed floors instead of pouring them and then doing self-leveler, the more we can think about optimizing for these large formats earlier, getting our tile installers in earlier on a closed site. There's so many ways for us to minimize the oftentimes useless costs that have to go in for prep work because we didn't think about it earlier. So instead we're having to do that work 2 and 3 times to get it right for tile. So again, that builds that story and that connotation that tile is too expensive. It doesn't have to be if you're thinking about it earlier. So I want to talk a little bit about exterior hardscapes and the 2cm material, and it's something that if you're not involved in it, if you do any exterior work at all in sales or design, you need to be thinking about the 2cm material because it has so much potential, because we can set it in grass, in sand, in gravel, but most importantly, let's go back there. I thought it was going to zoom in. Most importantly, it has so many benefits over all the competitors. The most critical one is right here, is the weight. The average weight of a porcelain paver is about 9.3 pounds per square foot, whereas everything else, clay brick, 21 to 31, cast in place concrete, 12.5, concrete pavers, 27 to 36, natural stone, 15 to 50. It makes a huge impact on the cost and on the installation speed and cost of the installation as well. So we've got a lot of tradespeople that are normally doing exterior paving, and they love working with porcelain. It's an easy thing for you to get into your specs and get your clients into a higher performance product that offers that seamless transition into exterior spaces. So make sure you're thinking about that. Utilize the industry standards and the various gauges that we have, from 3.7 mil up to 12 mil for countertops. So 3.7 for walls, 6 mil for floors, 12 mil for countertops, 20 mil and higher for exteriors. Utilize the different gauges that we have and use your slabs effectively. Think about leveraging gauge and specifying the different thicknesses to get that material continuity all the way through your space and increase your budget room so that you can do that. Think about the performance of the finish that you're using. Now, there's all sorts of finishes that we can do today, from natural matte to clefted to polished to semi-polished to a satin, and getting involved with your reps and asking the questions about what the abrasion resistance is, how it's going to perform in the space that you're doing, and doing that due diligence in advance makes a huge difference on the overall impression and connection to the space that your clients are going to have. So finally, I want to talk about elevation tile with high depth punches and 3D capabilities at our disposal over the past couple of years. There's so many thin mortared or mechanically fastened elevation tile that we can do today to achieve the looks of brick, of worked stone, of literally almost anything that you can imagine. So think about that for your exterior spaces as well. And second last thing that I want to talk about is our ability to transition in finish as well on the surface, and look for programs that allow for that give you those layers, because they're using digital technology to pick out the vein patterns in that marble in a sort of iridescent metallic. It adds layers and it adds levels for the eye to see that hyper matte surface with the metallic high gloss vein is building into all of the mirrors and the high gloss vessel sinks and fixtures that are going into that space. So thinking about those layers and the kind of finishes that you're specifying makes a huge impact on clients today. The last thing that I want to talk about is that there are field tile today, because we can do so much with digital, and we can really apply the same graphic to almost any molded surface the way we never used to be able to do with screen printing or traditional glaze. There's all kinds of worked stone that we can do. There's entire tile programs that have multiple different finishes just in one stone, so that you can keep that cohesiveness throughout the areas of the building that you're doing, and oftentimes not add any cost, where as you would with the natural material or a couple of years ago in tile. So I hope I've given you some food for thought, some ideas of how to utilize ceramic more effectively in your projects. Leave us a comment here, and or share it with someone you think might find it interesting. We love having you here on Tile of Spain, and make sure that you look at our YouTube and Facebook channels for all the other content that we've been putting out over the past month. Stay safe, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in again.